Hi, YouTube. My name is Jack, and today is a bad day. For anyone outside of the US who hasn't been following, today is the day of the presidential inauguration here in the States. Like, as of now, Donald Trump is once again the president of the United States. And I won't go off too much with my moaning and wailing and gnashing of teeth, but it was very bad the first time around. I expect it to be worse the second time around, and I'm very scared. And a lot of the people that I know who are in some way politically vulnerable are also very scared. So, with that in mind, we're going to talk today about political magic uh, and about why I really don't do a lot of political magic, and sort of kind of in conjunction with that, whether political magic is effective at all. Magic has a long history of political use, right? If you read like the Ars Goetia, there are demons in there whose express and specific purpose is to help you gain political ascendancy. Um, Historically, King James was terrified of the threat of witchcraft, and there were people who were tried and convicted of the crime of conspiring to murder the king by the power of witchcraft. So certainly King James thought that political magic was effective. It's also, right, like if you read Macbeth, which of course was written for King James, but if you read Macbeth, the witches there are not trafficking with peasants. They are dealing in riddles and affairs of death with none other than Macbeth, um, who is Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and who shall be king hereafter. I'm so mad. I don't have Apple TV, and so I don't have access to the Denzel Washington Macbeth, which is a real shame. It's a real shame. I rewatched the 2015 Macbeth with Michael Fassbender and Marion Cotillard, um, which is in many ways it's a lovely production. It's not my favorite production that I've seen, but they make a couple of really interesting directorial choices at the end there. The cinematography goes to shit. But then that is consistently a problem with trying to adapt Macbeth to the screen, because on stage, all of the battles are off stage and you never actually see the battles. But when people adapt it to the screen, inevitably they want to show the battles, and that just becomes messy very quickly. But this is not a video about the staging of Macbeth. This is a video about political witchcraft or political magic. So certainly magic has always had this kind of expectation, this assumption that it could be used for political ends. And this is a thing that political leaders like King James were really terrified of. Hi, sweetie. Hi, thank you for joining me. Yeah. Oh, you're such a good girl. Um, and we see that today as well. We see lots of people doing magic for political purposes. In particular, during the first Trump administration, there was a big movement to, like, bind Trump from doing harm, prevent Trump from doing harm, and so on. How did that work out? And I don't mean to be too glib here. I don't mean to be too tongue-in-cheek or to be disrespectful toward any of the people who were engaged in that magical project. From where I stand, that magical project appears to have been a catastrophic failure. Now, there are people who will say that, had they not done the magical work that they did, that the Trump administration would have been much more damaging or much more pernicious or whatever, that things would have been worse. Personally, I am not swayed by that argument. I think that when we do magic, we take it upon ourselves, we take on a responsibility to try to engage as honestly as possible with the question of whether that magic worked. right? When we cast a spell, the goal is not to cast the spell and then delude ourselves into thinking that that spell worked no matter what happened. The goal is to cast a spell and then, as honestly as possible, and of course we're imperfect human beings, like we're never going to be impartial about this, but like as honestly as possible, to evaluate whether we achieved the desired result of that spell. And if we didn't achieve the desired result of that spell, pending the assumption that magic is real and it works, which of course is an assumption that not everyone is willing to make. And there are lots of people who would say, like, you should just abandon the project altogether. Setting that aside, if we're operating in a paradigm where we assume that magic is real and it works, if we cast a spell and did not achieve the desired result, I think we owe it to ourselves to acknowledge that, to be real about it, and then to take a step back and try to understand why. And I have not seen any indication that political magic in my lifetime has been efficacious. Or at least not political magic being done by the people who share my politics. Who knows? Maybe the MAGA crew are just better at magic than everyone else. What a terrifying thought. Anyway, I think there are a couple of reasons for that. The big one that sticks out in my mind, at least, and the reason that I really don't engage in the project of political magic, is that I think political magic fundamentally misunderstands the scale at which humans are capable of having an individual influence. Right? Magic is, in many ways, a means of expanding our locus of control and attempting to influence things that we would not be able to influence by conventional means. Or to influence them more than we would be able to influence them by conventional means, or to influence them differently than through conventional means, right? It's an attempt of exerting some kind of, applying some kind of pressure from a different direction to help get things moving. Magic does not deal in impossibilities, right? There is no spell out there that can make you fly on a broomstick unless you put the broomstick in a plane and then also get into the plane. But the idea that a lot of magical practitioners engage with, at least magical practitioners who are doing like witchcraft and the kinds of witchcraft that I'm engaging with, right? There are other magical paradigms. I'm not necessarily talking specifically about those. But the idea that a lot of magical practitioners engage with is that magic is a way of sort of sticking your thumb on the scale, right? So it's not going to completely 100% determine an outcome, but it is going to move the outcome in the direction that you want. And the key to effective magic, at least how I was taught it and how I teach it, is to find the place where you can apply pressure and where that pressure might actually do something. So if you're applying for a job, you like, it's not enough to just do magic and say like, get me the job, right? You want to you want to direct yourself towards something more specific and toward the thing where you can be the most efficacious. So that means A, something that is reasonably easy to accomplish, right? And B, something that once accomplished will have a decent sized effect on the sequence of events that follows it. So for example, if you are applying for a job and you want to do a spell to get your job, microphone is still on. Microphone is still on. Just checking. You might do a spell to make sure that your resume gets seen, right? Make sure that the correct eyes get on the resume. Because particularly now, when so many companies are using like applicant tracking software AI algorithms to sort through resumes before they even land on someone's desk, there is no guarantee that you would even get that far. And that seems like something that is relatively easy to accomplish and that has a rather disproportionately large effect on your chances of achieving the final goal. And then really, like, The ideal situation in magic is to do magic piecewise, just one step at a time, right? Do a spell to get your resume seen. And then once your resume has been seen, do a spell to make sure that it is remembered and makes an impression. And then once it is remembered and makes an impression, do a spell to get an interview, and then so on and so forth. Um, Realistically, a lot of the time that's not possible because you don't know when one step has been accomplished. But like breaking magic down to size, breaking one goal into a series of steps where you can apply magical pressure is at least the way that I approach magic. And in my experience of doing magic, the most effective way of approaching it. Because you're not trying to accomplish some big, outlandish, unexpected thing all at once. You're starting small and you are working your way toward it. And with all of that in mind, the thing that I think fails about a lot of political magic is that it's too big and it's too far outside of your locus of control. Right? Magic relies on your ability to exert pressure somewhere, your ability to sort of stick your thumb on the scale. And with political magic, I think a lot of the time people are going for really big, sort of end goal type results, which is just not the most effective way to work magic. So, right, like, let Kamala Harris be elected. And, like, there are a lot of things that have to happen in order for you to get to that point. And a lot of those things did not happen. But then, secondly, I think that with political magic, right, like the size of the scales themselves is different. If I'm putting my thumb on the scale for like trying to make sure that my resume gets seen in a pile of resumes of the 50 to 100 people who applied for a particular job, me putting my thumb on the scale might actually do something there. Again, we're working within a paradigm where there is an assumption that magic actually does let you put your thumb on the scale. If you aren't willing to make that assumption, no beef, but like this video is not going to be terribly interesting to you. I'd be surprised if you were still here at 12 minutes in. But if you're doing magic to try to affect something at the scale of a country of hundreds of millions of people, you putting your thumb on the scale is going to be a negligible difference in those weights. And I think this is a thing that is sometimes very hard for people to admit or come to terms with. Right? Magic can expand our locus of control. Magic does allow us to have an influence on the world around us beyond just the influence that we would normally have. But each of us is still only one person. Each coven or each working magical group is still only a handful of people. And we're not going to be able to shift the entire tone of world politics or national politics or even like regional politics by us putting our thumbs on the scale. Like it's too big for magic to affect. If you got, you know, 1 million people across the country to all do magic for the same purposes, maybe potentially that could have some kind of effect in conjunction with other things happening, and if you chose your target very carefully. Realistically, you're not going to. Realistically, you're never going to. And I mean, this is the problem of politics in general, is that coordinating people to achieve political ends is very difficult. And that is as true in any kind of magical attempt as it is in just like regular old electoral democracy. Like, it's hard enough to get people to go vote for the candidates or ballot initiatives that you think they should be voting for. How do you think you're going to be able to coordinate a magical effort that is going to affect things on that same scale? It's just like politics is just really big, and it is too big for us to affect with magic. I also think I have similar feelings about doing divination, right? I pointedly don't do divination for elections. I broke that rule this year, and I did an electional chart, and I looked at the electional astrology of when the election was happening, and I sort of privately panicked to a handful of people about that. But I never read tarot about the election because I think there's a certain point where like the scale of that is just too big for it to be something that we have access to through divination. And then also like personal biases filter in, and with something like that you like are so deeply invested in, I think it's very hard to read clearly and not just to see what you are hoping to see. But but so I don't do political magic. Um, and the real reason is that I think that magic allows me to affect the world around me, but it allows me to affect the world around me on the same scale that I, as an individual acting through ordinary means, am able to affect the world around me. The type of effect I have might be different. I might be able to do things in a different way or do different things that I can't necessarily achieve on my own, but there's still things like on the same scale, right? If we think about a magical analog to like getting my resume to the top of the pile, it's kind of the equivalent of like doing doing the thing that everyone's parents told them they should do, which is like walking into a place of business with your resume in hand and saying, "Hi, I'm interested in working here. Here's a copy of my resume." That's a thing that like that's on a scale where individual action makes sense. Or there are things that like if you're working with a magical group, there's a scale of action where a handful of people working together makes sense and are able to accomplish things. National politics, international politics, very different things, right? Like just very different, and those things occur at a scale where individual action, unless it's very well coordinated with lots and lots and lots of other people doing individual action, just isn't going to have a meaningful difference, right? If magic could affect world politics, the ceasefire in Gaza would have come much, much sooner than it did. So, with all of that in mind, this is kind of bleak because Trump is president now, and shit's going to be really bad. And I have just said effectively that I don't think there's much that any of us can do magically about that. But I think that's also realistic. Like, I'm not saying just lie down and die. Obviously, coordinated efforts to protect the most vulnerable and affected people are still important. Um, but let's be realistic about what magic can and can't achieve. Let's be realistic about what kinds of political action we can engage with that actually have a hope of making some kind of a measurable difference, at least for some people. And let's focus our attention there. This is very much on the scale of like all of the advice that you hear about community organizing that says like you need to invest your resources in your community. You need to invest your resources in helping the people who are immediately present with you. Organizing whatever mutual aid efforts, volunteering, donating to local nonprofits, or donating supplies to unsheltered people in your area, or like whatever it is, but like investing your actions in things taking place at the local scale where your actions are likely to be able to help, rather than just throwing yourself against the wall of things that are at a much larger scale than you can realistically do anything about. And I think the same is true for magic. Like if I'm gonna do political magic, it's gonna be political magic to try to protect particular people. It's going to be political magic to try to protect particular like communities that are here where I am, communities that I'm engaged with, because those are things that are on a scale where my action or the actions of the people that I do magic with might actually do something. So that's all I have for you today. I am going to go drink a 20-ounce hot chocolate and read a shitty fantasy novel because fuck else am I going to do? Goodbye.